Hey everyone, it's Vaiaphraim here. Welcome to this week's homework composition. This time it's all about chiptune. I'll give you a brief introduction about bits, what 8-bit even means and such, and I'll also tell you about the origins of chip music and the used hardware. We'll then talk about the available channels and tone generators of the RP2A07, the limitation of the chips, and a few techniques which you can use to work around these. However, most of them are my techniques, so take them with a grain of salt and feel free to deviate. After a sneak peek into my DAW, you'll get your assignment for this week and a short preview about what's yet to come. So let's talk about bits. In general, each bit can only be either true or false, power, no power, 0 or 1. It's like our regular digits, just that we can use 10 distinct values for each, as opposed to the 2 distinct values of a single computer's bit. Here's a list of, a few bits. As you can see, the number of possible distinct values represented by bits doubles with each added bit. 8-bit technically means a representation of one of 256 values. This already shows that there will be trouble if you want to perform automation of pitch, volume, and so on at the same time. The first version of the Game Boy utilized only 4 bits, and yet the composers were able to create awesome sounds. So let's see how that works. What you see here is the 2A07 sound chip. It was used in the Japanese family computer console, the Famicom, as well as in the Nintendo Entertainment System, NES. In fact, there were 2 versions of this chip, based on the clock speed of countries. While most of the world used the PAL system with 60 Hz, the USA favorized NTSC with 50 Hz. Apart from the clock speed, the 2A03 and the 2A07 were identical in functionality. And this is what the chip offered: 2 pulse generators with basic volume, pitch and pulse width envelopes, 1 triangle generator without any controls at all. Then there was 1 noise generator. It had 2 sample rates to choose from, duty and volume automation. And then there's also a channel storing samples in a delta pulse code modulation format, short DPCM. It utilized redundant elements of samples as a way of compression, but I won't go further into depth. Generally, the pulse generators were used for melody and harmonies, while the tri was responsible for the bass. In theory, you can also use tris for pitched percussion and so on, but for this WHC, we'll use it for bass only. The noise generator's job is to create drums and special effects, kicks, snares, and so on. The DPCM will not be used this week, but in theory you could load it with drum hits or any samples really, even voice. So, leaving aside the drums and the samples, we only have 3 instruments playing notes. So chords are a problem already, since a simple triad alone would use up the entire spectrum, making it impossible to add a melody or a bass line to the track. Also, if you only have 3 channels, how is it possible to mix up the sounds a bit? Furthermore, what if you want to create a delay or a reverb effect? It's not like you can just slap an effect VST or so onto a chip. So here are some compensation techniques. You might have guessed a few of them already. An arpeggio, ARP, is nothing but a chord, just that the notes are played in sequence rather than at the same time. This can happen at virtually any speed, so use it to your advantage to achieve a certain feel for your track. Now, with 1 pulse generator ARPing, you still have 2 available channels left. A tri for the bass line, which you can also arpeggiate, and another pulse for leads. The second point might seem logical, but I thought I should tell you anyway that each pulse channel can play different sounds, as long as they don't overlap. As for delay and reverb, if you're using tracking software, it takes care of this by default, but in a regular DAW, I'd advise you not to use the built-in effects and solve it in your arrangement rather. One thing I like to do, and there may be better methods, is to keep gaps in your arrangement. Well, this is all very theoretical, so I prepared an example for you in my DAW. Let me tab over to Reaper. So on the left I have an example how not to do chiptune, because here it is all, well, I'm not sure if you can see this, but there are up to 5 notes being played at the same time. I have a bass line, then I have a lot of triads, and a melody on top. Let's listen to what it sounds. You will notice it probably sounds like chiptune, but it actually isn't. Okay, so lots of notes at the same time, and many rules are being broken here. For once, there is no triangle channel being used. It's all just one synthesizer. I just wanted to demonstrate that it might sound like chiptune while there are many rules being broken. So, in the second part, I changed it up a bit. The melody remains the same, and the synth too. Then for the bass, I switched it over to a triangle, and I arpeggiated the bass, which means it's just octave jumps. It's just octave down, octave up, because I found it sounded more interesting that way. Just experiment around. And then there's the arp. The arp replaces the chords being played before. So instead of using up 3 channels, the arpeggio only counts as 1 channel, because only 1 note is played. And in rapid succession, the other notes follow. So let's listen to it in comparison. I'll play the last few bars from the previous example just so you hear the difference. Okay, as you can see, it clears up much more. Also, the mix is, in my opinion, much better and easier, because there's just not too many instruments colliding with with each other, because they're not playing at the same time. So in the next step, I will add 2 more elements. On the one hand, it will be noise, and on the other hand, it will be a delay type of effect, which we'll be creating manually this time. Again, if you have better methods, feel free to use them instead. So first of all, I will show you an arrangement with a lot of free space, and this space will be utilized later. So let's hear how this sounds. Okay, now let's edit this thing. In the MIDI view, we can easily replicate the delay. A delay is nothing else but repeating a note which was played earlier after a fixed interval. So we can just copy it, slide it over, and get a delay effect. So I'll just copy this and put it there. I tried it out before, what I thought sounded nice, so I will copy it twice, and the second time. Now this will create a shuffled type of effect, which I personally really like, and I also like that that the melody changes a bit, so that it's not 3 times the same note before the next even is played. But there's also another reason, but I'll show you that later. So let's listen to the affected sound. I'll just skip to the end because it's just a loop, really. Okay, so that's the hand-drawn delay. So let's continue to the next part, which is we want to use the gaps. As you can see, I changed it up a bit here. I'll show you in the MIDI editor. Each third note is selected and shortened by the half of it. Why? Because there's a second instrument also taking up a pulse. And this instrument just fits into the gaps, which wouldn't be there otherwise, because before it looked like this, which means there would be two notes playing at the same time together with the ARP, and the ARP already is one channel, so we can't use a third note just like that. So this is what you cannot do with a regular delay, because the note will just extend anyway. So this is why this method is quite handy, I think. Let's listen to the gap version, which is, I think, a bit more interesting as the one we had before. I will also replay the last few bars so you notice the difference. Okay, so, and there's one final thing I wanted to show you. I mean, it's just the previous method taken to another level to some degree. So as you can see, I cut off the ARP in most of the parts of the arrangement and replaced it by other instruments. So in total there are 1, 2, 3, 4 instruments playing, alternating. Yeah, well, the fifth is the ARP, but it's only used as effect. And the tri-bass remains the same as usual. So this is the final example I can give to you. After that, you're on your own. So I hope you somewhat liked what I created here as a demonstration. And I have a few more slides to show to you, which I'll get to now. So the compensation techniques I just showed you more or less. Now here's your assignment. You will create a chiptune track. Be aware of the limitations and use them to your advantage. Also, don't use samples for this WHC, other than those provided in the link section, but that's for another time. So you can of course use your own favorite VST, and if you know your ways around trackers, please use them. But I have put a few links into the description and the WHC page, so you can play around with a few instruments and presets. One of my personal favorites, also I used it in the example before, it's Chip32. You can specify your own waveform there. Just be careful about the release settings, because notes cannot bleed into each other. So give them enough space if you're using long releases. Each instance of the Chip32 counts as a pulse generator, unless you're using the triangle preset. Another VST would be Peach, which is actually a sample unit. Yeah, I know, but I figured you might like a few samples that just sound like old consoles right off the bat. Treat it as a pulse generator unless it plays a chord, because there are a few presets which plays chords for some reason. But yeah, in that case, just consider both pulse generators being used up at the same time by this one instrument. Then there's YMCK, which is a Japanese chiptune band, I think. They released a plugin which is also very basic, even more basic than Chip32, but I think it's great for sound effects. Check out the sweep settings, the band range, play around a bit with noise, and I'm sure you'll find something that you like. And yeah, the oscillator kind is also it's the instrument you're using up. So if you're selecting noise, it's your noise generator. If you're using square, it's your pulse generator. And if you're using tri, it's your triangle generator. Okay, so there's one final VST I can recommend to play around with. This would be Pooh-Boy 2. It focuses on 4-bit sounds, so it has an extra feel of retro goodness. The presets are definitely worth checking out, and so are the controls. And depending on the waveform you used, again, this is the channel you use for this plugin. So, a short preview for the next weekly homework composition. I plan to send you a link to another VST, and this is quite close to the original 2A07 to some degree. And we'll do some sound design with that. We'll use envelopes and we'll make really cool instruments. Also, I want to try out how your samples could have sounded if they were put into a DPCM channel. And finally, I'll introduce to you another sound chip and talk about the basics of FM synthesis. So this concludes actually my assignment for you. Have fun this week and see you around. Bye.